I am 92, and I stayed faithful in a marriage long after the love had already died. I don't say that with pride. I say it because there isn't much time left to pretend otherwise. At my age, the days don't stretch very far. They arrive quietly, pass without much happening, and then they're gone. I spend a lot of time sitting by the window watching people who still have somewhere to go. I don't envy them exactly. It's more that I notice what I once had and didn't quite understand. I wasn't unhappy in the way people talk about it now. There were no scenes, no shouting, no dramatic departures. Just a long, slow thinning of something that used to feel solid. We were married when I was 27. She was 24. We met through family, as most people did back then. There wasn't a grand story to it. We spoke a few times, mostly polite conversations about ordinary things. She had a quiet way about her, not shy, just careful. I remember thinking that kind of steadiness would make for a good life. And it did, for a while. In the early years, there was something like closeness. Not passion the way people describe it in films, but a kind of warmth. We shared meals, routines, small jokes that didn't need explaining. I worked long hours. She kept the house running in a way that made everything feel in place. There was comfort in that. I didn't question it. Why would I? We had 2 children, a boy first, then a girl 3 years later. Life filled up quickly after that. Mornings were busy, evenings quieter but tired. There was always something to fix, something to pay for, something to plan ahead. Looking back, I think that's when things began to change. Not suddenly, not in a way you could point to, just less talking, less noticing. We stopped asking each other how the day had been. Not out of anger, it just didn't seem necessary. We already knew the shape of each other's days. Or at least we thought we did. She would sit at the table after dinner, sometimes longer than needed. I would read the newspaper or listen to the radio. There were moments when I could feel a kind of distance, like we were sitting in separate rooms even though we weren't. But I didn't reach across it. I told myself it was normal. That this was what marriage settled into, stability instead of excitement, routine instead of discovery. There was no single moment where I thought, the love is gone. It was more like noticing one day that you couldn't remember the last time you'd felt it clearly. She changed too, became quieter, more inward. Or maybe she had always been that way and I had only just started to see it. Sometimes she would look at me as if she wanted to say something, but then she wouldn't. I didn't ask. That's something I think about often now. How many chances there were to ask simple questions, to open something that had quietly closed. But I was busy, or at least I believed I was. Work became a place I understood better than home. There were clear expectations there, problems that could be solved, effort that led to results you could measure. At home, things were less clear. So I stayed longer at work when I could. I told myself I was doing it for the family. Years passed like that. The children grew up, left for their own lives. The house became quieter, but not in a peaceful way, just empty. We were left with each other again, but we didn't know how to return to that earlier version of us, the one that had felt like something shared. We didn't fight. People sometimes think a quiet marriage is a good one. But silence can be its own kind of distance. We slept in the same bed for decades, and I can't tell you the last time I reached for her without thinking about it first. It became something you had to decide to do, instead of something that happened on its own. And often, I didn't decide. There were other women over the years, not in the sense people might expect. I never had an affair. I was faithful in the strictest way. But I noticed others. I felt things I didn't allow myself to act on. I would come home and sit across from my wife at the table, and the contrast would be there, quiet but present. The life I had chosen, or maybe the one I had simply continued. I never spoke about it, not to her, not to anyone. I believed that staying was the right thing, that leaving would cause damage I couldn't justify. There were children, responsibilities, a shared history. All of that felt heavier than whatever had been lost. So I stayed. She stayed too, of course. I don't know if she ever considered leaving. If she did, she never said so. We became two people who knew each other very well and not at all. I could tell you what she would order at a restaurant, how she liked her tea, the way she folded laundry. But I couldn't tell you what she was thinking most days. And I didn't try hard enough to find out. There were small moments over the years where something almost returned. A shared laugh over something unexpected. A memory that surfaced and softened the air between us. But those moments didn't last. We let them pass instead of holding on to them. Maybe we didn't know how. In our 60s, she began to slow down. Nothing dramatic at first, just tired more often. Forgetting small things, misplacing items she would have kept track of easily before. We went to doctors. They used careful words. Early stages, they said. Manageable, they said. I remember sitting in the car after one of those appointments. She was looking out the window, quiet. I wanted to say something that would make it better, or at least less frightening. But I didn't know what that would be, so we drove home in silence. As her condition progressed, something changed in me. Not love in the way people describe it, but a kind of urgency. A realization that time was not just passing, it was narrowing. I began to notice her more. The way her hands moved, the way she would pause mid-sentence searching for a word that wouldn't come, the confusion in her eyes when something familiar no longer felt that way. I started to sit closer, to speak more gently, to help in ways I hadn't before. And I remember thinking more than once, why now? Why had it taken this for me to pay attention in the way I should have all along? There was one evening I think about often. She was sitting in her chair looking at an old photograph, our wedding day. She held it carefully as if it might break. She looked up at me and asked, "Who is that?" She was pointing at herself. I told her. I said her name softly as if that might help it stay with her. She nodded, but I could see it didn't settle anywhere. Then she asked, "Were we happy?" It wasn't a complicated question, but I didn't know how to answer it. I said yes. I don't know if that was true. Or maybe it was, once, in a way that didn't last. She nodded again as if that answer was enough. Then she went back to looking at the photograph. That was one of the last clear conversations we had. After that, things faded more quickly. She needed more care, more presence. The kind of presence I had spent years withholding without even realizing it. I stayed with her through all of it, every appointment, every difficult day, every long night. People would say I was a good husband, faithful, devoted, and I suppose I was in the end. But I can't help thinking about all the years before that, the years when she was still fully there and I wasn't. She passed away when I was 78. Quietly, in the early hours of the morning. I was sitting beside her, holding her hand. It felt small, lighter than I remembered. There was no final conversation, no moment of clarity where everything was understood, just a gradual slowing and then stillness. Afterward, the house felt different in a way I hadn't expected, not just empty, final. I walked through the rooms and saw all the places where we had lived side by side. Not together, not apart, something in between. I kept thinking about that question she had asked. Were we happy? I still don't have a clean answer. There were good years. There was stability, shared effort, a life built carefully over time. But there was also a distance that we allowed to grow quietly, until it filled most of the space between us. I stayed faithful, that's true. I never betrayed her in the ways people usually mean. But there are other ways to fail someone, quieter ways. Not noticing, not asking, not reaching out when there's still time. I didn't leave. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't break the shape of our life. But I also didn't fully live inside it. That's the part that stays with me now. At 92, there isn't much left to do except remember. And remembering is not a clean process. It doesn't give you answers in a neat order. It brings back moments you overlooked, words you didn't say, chances you didn't recognize at the time. I don't tell this story to suggest what anyone should do. People stay for many reasons. They leave for many reasons. There isn't a simple line between right and wrong in these things. I only know what it felt like to be there at the end, holding the hand of someone I had shared a lifetime with, and realizing how much of that lifetime had been lived at a distance. If I had understood earlier, but that kind of thinking doesn't go anywhere useful. Time doesn't return itself just because you finally see it clearly. It moves in one direction, quietly, steadily, and then it stops. If you're listening to me now, I won't tell you to change anything. That wouldn't mean much coming from someone at the end of his life. But I will say this. There were many ordinary evenings when I could have turned toward her instead of away. Many small chances to ask a question, to listen a little longer, to close the space that was beginning to form. They didn't look important at the time. That's the trouble with most important things. They don't announce themselves. They just pass by, quietly, like everything else. I have a few photographs left, some letters, objects that carry pieces of a life that felt continuous when it was happening, and now feels like something I'm trying to hold together in memory. Her face in those photographs is clear, younger than I ever think of her now. There's a softness there I didn't always notice when it was in front of me every day. I sit with those sometimes. Not for long, just enough to remember that she was more than a quiet figure at the end of the hallway in our later years. She was a whole person, with thoughts and feelings I didn't always make room for. That's a hard thing to admit even now. There's not much left ahead of me. I can feel that in the way my body moves, in how quickly the days seem to close. I don't expect any kind of resolution. Life doesn't arrange itself that way at the end. It just narrows, and then eventually it's done. If there's anything I carry with me now, it isn't regret in the loud sense. It's quieter than that, more like an awareness that's settled too late, that a life can be shared for many years and still leave something important untouched. That faithfulness by itself is not the same as presence, and that love, once it fades, doesn't always return just because you stayed. I sit here most evenings watching the light change outside the window. It reminds me how gradual everything is. Even the endings, nothing sudden, just less and less until there's almost nothing left. That's how it was for us, and that's how it is for me now.